People often mistake fury for something loud and messy, but real power operates in total silence. When Jessica walked into that courtroom, flaunting a limited edition Chanel suit she bought with Victoria Taylor's husband's credit card, she smiled at Victoria. She was convinced she had won, believing the prenup was ironclad and that she was leaving with half of the Taylor empire. But arrogance caused her to overlook one tiny, crucial detail. She never checked who actually signed the checks. Stick around, because you're about to witness the most satisfying courtroom takedown in New York history. This isn't just a divorce, it's a corporate execution. The invitation to the charity gala was heavy, printed on cream cardstock with gold leaf lettering. It sat on the marble island of the kitchen in their Tribeca penthouse, mocking Victoria. It was for the Taylor Future Foundation, a charity her husband, Arthur, had founded 3 years ago to give back to the community. In reality, it was a tax haven that allowed him to network with senators and hedge fund managers while looking like a saint. Victoria Taylor was the perfect accessory to these events. At 42, she had maintained the kind of figure that required starvation and Pilates, and the kind of smile that required years of practice in swallowing insults. Arthur liked her elegant, silent, and supportive. "Victoria, have you seen my cufflinks? The onyx ones?" Arthur's voice boomed from the hallway. He walked into the kitchen, adjusting the collar of his bespoke Brioni tuxedo. At 48, Arthur was still a handsome man. Silver fox hair, jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and the confident stride of a man whose net worth hovered in the 9 figures. He looked at his wife, not with love, but with the critical eye of an art collector checking for dust on a statue. "They are on the dresser, Arthur, where you left them last night," Victoria said, sipping her black coffee. He grunted, turning back. "Make sure you wear the blue dress tonight, the midnight blue one. It matches the branding for the new tech rollout." "I was planning on the red," she said softly. He stopped. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders tensed. "Blue, Victoria. We are a team. We present a united front. Blue represents stability." Stability. That was his favorite word. But stability was a lie. Victoria had known about Jessica for 2 months. It wasn't a private investigator who told her, and it wasn't a slip-up with a lipstick stain. It was far more modern, and far more humiliating. She had synced their iCloud accounts to update his contacts for a holiday card list, something she did every year. He had forgotten to decouple his business iPad. The messages were nauseatingly cliché. "Can't wait to see you, Daddy. She's so boring compared to you. When are you leaving her?" "Just hold on, Jess. The merger happens in January. Once the stock bumps, I cash out, file the papers, and we're gone." Jessica. Jessica Banks. Victoria looked her up, of course. 26 years old, a junior marketing executive at Arthur's firm. Blonde, bubbly, and possessed of that terrifying, unearned confidence of someone who has never truly lost anything. Victoria wore the blue dress that night. The gala was held at the Pierre Hotel. The ballroom was a sea of old money and new ambition. Crystal chandeliers trembled under the bass of a string quartet playing pop covers. Victoria stood by Arthur's side, shaking hands, smiling until her cheeks ached. "Victoria, you look stunning," said Silas Moore, Arthur's corporate attorney. Silas was a viper in a 3-piece suit, a man who had buried more bodies legally than the mafia did physically. "Thank you, Silas," she replied, her voice cool. "Arthur tells me big things are on the horizon," Silas said, clinking his champagne glass against Arthur's. "The merger with Omnicorp. It's going to make you the king of New York, Artie." Arthur beamed, puffing out his chest. "We built this from the ground up, Silas. From a garage in Queens to this. It's the American dream. We. He loved using that word when he was boasting, but when it came to decisions, it was always I. And speaking of the team, Arthur said, his eyes darting toward the entrance. Victoria's stomach dropped. Walking in, unauthorized, uninvited, but undeniably present, was Jessica. She wasn't wearing blue. She was wearing red. A bright, scarlet, backless gown that screamed for attention. She didn't approach them immediately. She worked the room, laughing too loudly, touching the arms of board members, flashing a smile that was predatory. "Who is that?" Silas asked, frowning. "Just a junior exec," Arthur said, his voice tightening. "High potential. Very aggressive." "I can see that," Victoria whispered. She watched them. She watched the way Arthur's eyes followed her. She watched the secret signal, a tug of his earlobe, that meant he was going to the washroom. She watched Jessica check her phone and head toward the terrace 2 minutes later. Victoria didn't follow them. That would be what a hysterical wife does. Instead, she walked over to Silas. "Silas," she said, keeping her voice conversational, "how is the structuring of the Omnicorp deal coming along?" Silas looked down at her, patronizingly. "It's complex, Victoria. Lots of moving parts." "Why do you ask?" "Arthur usually handles the heavy lifting." "I know," she said, taking a sip of sparkling water. "I just wanted to make sure the ownership clauses were updated, since the passing of my father." Silas paused. For a split second, a flicker of confusion crossed his face, but he smoothed it over. "The trust handles all that, Victoria. You don't need to worry your pretty head about it. Arthur has power of attorney over the operational assets." "Right," she smiled. "Power of attorney over the operational assets." Silas didn't catch the distinction. Why would he? Men like Silas and Arthur saw women like Victoria as furniture. They were decorative. They made the house look good. But they didn't hold up the roof. Victoria excused herself and walked toward the terrace. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, but there was a gap. She stood in the shadows, the cold winter air seeping through the glass. They were there. Arthur had Jessica pressed up against the stone railing, his hands on her waist. "You shouldn't be here, Jess," he hissed. But there was no anger in it, only lust. "I got tired of waiting," she purred, running a hand down his lapel. "You said January. It's December, Artie. I want to be the one on your arm, not that ice queen." "Soon," Arthur promised. "The deal closes on the 15th. Once the funds clear, I'm serving her. She won't know what hit her. I've got Silas drawing up the papers. We're offering her the beach house and a monthly stipend. If she fights it, we bury her in legal fees." "She's pathetic," Jessica laughed. "Does she even know?" "Victoria?" Arthur scoffed. "Victoria doesn't know how to turn on a computer without calling tech support. She has no idea." Victoria stepped back from the curtain, her heart hammering against her ribs, not out of heartbreak, but out of pure, cold adrenaline. He was going to discard her. After 20 years. After she nursed him through his burnout in 2009. After she used her father's connections to get his first loan approved. After she quietly sold her mother's jewelry to cover payroll when the company was 3 days away from bankruptcy in the early days. He thought she was stupid. He thought she was weak. She turned around and walked back into the party. She found a waiter, took a glass of champagne, and downed it in one swallow. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to cry. She pulled her phone from her clutch and sent a text message. It wasn't to a lawyer. It wasn't to a friend. It was to a man named Tobias Finch. Tobias was a forensic accountant who had been fired from 3 major firms for being too thorough. He was expensive, he was paranoid, and he hated men like Arthur Taylor. Text to Tobias. Green light. Execute Phase 1. He's filing in January. The reply came 10 seconds later. Text from Tobias. Copy that, Mrs. Taylor. Let's burn the kingdom. Victoria walked back to the center of the room, spotting Arthur coming in from the terrace, adjusting his tie, looking flushed and victorious. He walked up to her, placing a hand on the small of her back. "Everything okay, darling?" he asked. She looked up at him, and for the first time in years her smile reached her eyes, because she was looking at a dead man walking. "Everything is perfect, Arthur," she said. "I was just thinking about the future." He squeezed her waist. "The future is bright, Victoria." "Oh," she whispered. "You have no idea." The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in acting. Victoria played the role of the oblivious, doting wife to perfection. She organized his dry cleaning, she hosted his business dinners, and she nodded politely when he talked about the Omnicorp merger, as if it were his personal coronation. Meanwhile, Tobias Finch was dissecting Arthur's life. They met in a dingy diner in New Jersey, far away from the prying eyes of Manhattan's elite. Tobias was a small, wiry man with thick glasses and coffee-stained teeth. He slid a thick file across the formica table. "He's sloppy," Tobias said, biting into a pickle. "Arrogant men always are. He's been funneling money out of the main operating account into a shell company in the Caymans called Blue Horizon LLC, presumably to hide assets before the divorce." "How much?" Victoria asked, flipping through the documents. "About 12 million so far, but that's peanuts compared to the merger bonus. When Omnicorp buys Taylor Dynamics, Arthur is set to personally pocket $40 million as a performance retention bonus. And he thinks he can hide that from me. He's going to try to argue that since the deal closes after he files for divorce, it's not marital property," Tobias explained. "It's a classic move. He files on January 2nd. The deal closes January 15th. Technically, the money comes in when he's a single man." Victoria stared at the numbers. They were just digits on a page, but they represented 20 years of her life. "He's forgetting the articles of incorporation," she said quietly. Tobias paused. "The what?" "When we started the company," she said, "my father insisted on a specific structure. Arthur was the CEO, he was the face. But the ownership, that was different." Tobias's eyes widened behind his lenses. "Do you have the original documents, the ones from 20 years ago? Because digital records from that far back are spotty at the registrar." "I have them," she said, "in a safety deposit box that Arthur thinks contains my grandmother's antique silverware. If those papers say what I think they say," Tobias whistled low, "then Arthur isn't just screwing himself. He's handing you a loaded gun." "I need you to confirm the chain of custody on the holding company," Victoria instructed. "And Tobias? I need photos of him and Jessica. Not just at parties. I need hotel receipts, flight manifests, time-stamped proof of infidelity. New York is a no-fault state for divorce, but for the morality clause in the company bylaws, it matters." "You have a morality clause in the company bylaws?" Tobias laughed. "Who wrote this thing?" "My father," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. "He never trusted Arthur. He said Arthur had wandering eyes." Victoria drove back to the city, her mind racing. The plan was risky. She had to let Arthur file for divorce. She had to let him think he had blindsided her. If she moved too early, he might delay the merger or hide the assets better. She had to let him lead her to the slaughter, only to realize she was holding the knife. Christmas came and went. It was a grotesque display. Arthur bought her a diamond tennis bracelet, generic cold, expensive. She knew he had bought Jessica a Cartier love bracelet. She saw the receipt in his jacket pocket. On New Year's Eve, they hosted a party at the penthouse. Jessica was there again, this time as the +1 of a VP of sales. It was bold, disrespectful. She clinked glasses with Victoria at midnight. "Happy New Year, Victoria," she said, her eyes mocking. "I have a feeling 2026 is going to be a year of big changes." "I agree, Jessica," Victoria replied, sipping her champagne. "Change is inevitable. It's how we adapt to it that defines us." Jessica smirked and walked away, swaying her hips. January 2nd arrived. The morning was grey and slushy. Arthur was up early, dressed in his power suit. He didn't drink coffee. He was pacing. "Victoria, can we sit down for a moment?" he asked. Victoria was sitting on the sofa, reading a book. She marked a page slowly and looked up. "Of course, Arthur. What is it?" He sat opposite her, not next to her. He clasped his hands. The rehearsed speech was coming. "Victoria, we've been together a long time, and things haven't been right. You know that. We've grown apart." "Have we?" she asked innocently. "Yes," he insisted, gaining momentum. I need more. I need a partner who understands the speed of my life. I've spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce." He waited for the tears. He waited for the screaming. She simply nodded. "I see." He blinked. You see? That's it? "Well, Arthur, I'm not going to beg you to love me," she said calmly. "I've prepared a generous package," he said quickly, pulling a folder from his briefcase. "The beach house in the Hamptons, the 2 SUVs, and spousal support of $20,000 a month for 5 years. 20,000. It wouldn't even cover the property tax on the Hamptons house. "And the company?" she asked. Arthur laughed, a short, sharp bark. "The company? Victoria, be reasonable. I built Taylor Dynamics. I run it. You haven't stepped foot in the office in a decade. The company is mine. Besides, the prenup you signed waives your right to business assets acquired by me." "Acquired by you," she repeated. "Key words. It's a standard deal, Victoria. Sign it, and we can keep this civil. Don't sign it, and I will drag this out until you have nothing." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "I'm staying at the Four Seasons tonight. I expect to hear from your lawyer by the end of the week." He walked out. The elevator doors chimed and closed. Victoria waited 1 minute. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and watched his Bentley pull out of the garage. She picked up her phone and dialed. "Tobias? I'm here." "He did it. He's at the Four Seasons." "Game on," Tobias said. "One more thing," Victoria said. "Call the movers. I want his things out of the penthouse by noon, and change the locks." "Victoria," Tobias warned. "That's aggressive." "No, Tobias," she said, her voice hard as diamond. "That's just the opening statement." Changing the locks was a petty move, Victoria admitted to herself. But pettiness is a necessary survival tactic when you are dealing with narcissists. They expect you to collapse. They do not expect you to inconvenience them. By 2 p.m. that same day, her phone rang. It was Arthur. "Victoria, the key fob isn't working. The doorman says he has new instructions. What the hell is going on?" "I told you, Arthur," she said, putting her feet up on the velvet ottoman. "You moved out. I'm protecting my residence." "It's my residence. My name is on the deed." "Actually, it's in the name of the family trust," she corrected him. "And since you voluntarily vacated the premises to cohabitate with your mistress at a hotel, my lawyer advised me to secure the property against unauthorized entry. You can pick up your boxes in the lobby. I had the maid pack them. She was very thorough. I believe she even packed your dirty gym socks." She hung up before he could scream. But Arthur wasn't the problem. Arthur was predictable. Jessica was the wild card. 3 days later, Victoria was having lunch at Le Coucou with the board of the Botanical Garden. It was a power lunch, ladies who lunched not to gossip, but to decide which senator would get funding for their re-election based on their stance on historical preservation. She saw her walk in. Jessica wasn't hiding anymore. She walked in with her arm linked through Arthur's. It was the middle of the workday, yet there was the CEO of Taylor Dynamics parading his 26-year-old mistress in one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan. The room didn't go silent. These people were too polite for that, but the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Eyes darted, whispers fluttered behind menus. Arthur spotted Victoria. He froze. He tried to steer Jessica toward the bar, but she saw Victoria too, and she didn't turn away. She smiled, a wide, shark-like grin. She whispered something to Arthur, pulled his arm, and marched him right over to their table. "Victoria," Arthur said, his voice strained. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I have a standing reservation on Tuesdays, Arthur. You know that," Victoria said, not bothering to stand. "Ladies, you know my husband, and this is his assistant, I believe?" Mrs. Vanderbilt, the matriarch of the table, adjusted her spectacles and looked at Jessica like she was a stain on the tablecloth. "Actually," Jessica piped up, her voice a little too loud, a little too shrill for the room. "I'm his partner. Jessica, nice to meet you all." She extended a hand. No one took it. "Partner?" Mrs. Vanderbilt asked dryly. "In what capacity, dear? Crime?" Jessica's smile faltered. "In life, and in business. I'm taking over the marketing direction for the Omnicorp merger." Victoria took a sip of her wine. "That's ambitious, considering you've never run a campaign larger than a holiday email blast." Arthur's face turned purple. "That's enough, Victoria. We're just here to eat. Come on, Jess." "No," Jessica said, planting her feet. She looked at Victoria, her eyes burning with hatred. "You can act high and mighty all you want, Victoria, but we both know the truth. You're yesterday's news. Arthur needs someone who can keep up with him. Someone with vision. You're just dead weight." The table went deadly silent. Even the waiters stopped moving. Victoria set her glass down. She didn't yell. She didn't throw her drink. She looked her up and down, inspecting her like a knockoff handbag. "Jessica," she said softly, "you are wearing a red dress to a lunch service. You are speaking out of turn to the chairwoman of the Botanical Board, and you are sleeping with a married man who hasn't even filed his financial disclosures yet. You aren't a partner. You are a liability, and Arthur hates liabilities." Arthur grabbed her arm, hard. "We're leaving." He dragged her away. As they retreated, Victoria saw them arguing near the coat check. "Well," Mrs. Vanderbilt said, breaking the silence, "she seems spirited." "She's temporary," Victoria said, picking up her fork. "Now, about the spring fundraiser." She played it cool, but inside she was shaking, not with fear, but with rage. She had dared to come into Victoria's world and insult her. That night, Victoria called Benedict Cole. Benedict was the antithesis of Silas Moore. Silas was flashy, a TV lawyer. Benedict was terrifying. He was 70 years old, operated out of a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, and charged $1,500 an hour. He didn't have a website. You had to be referred by someone who had survived a catastrophe. "Benedict," she said, "they are getting sloppy. She's parading around town claiming she's running the marketing for the merger." "Good," Benedict's gravelly voice rasped. "Let them get comfortable. Did Tobias get the data?" "He did. Arthur is moving assets. He transferred another $2 million to Blue Horizon yesterday." "Let him," Benedict said. "We need him to feel safe. We need him to think you are fighting for the beach house and the china. If he thinks you're after the company, he'll burn it down before he hands it over. We have to wait for the deposition. When is it? February 14th. Benedict chuckled darkly. Valentine's Day. How poetic. The conference room at Silas Moore's firm was designed to intimidate. Glass walls, a view of the Hudson River, and a table long enough to land a plane on. Victoria sat on one side, flanked by Benedict and a junior associate. Arthur sat on the other, next to Silas. Jessica wasn't there, she wasn't allowed to be, but her presence hung in the room like cheap perfume. The videographer adjusted his camera. We are on the record. Taylor v. Taylor. Deposition of Arthur Taylor. February 14th, 2026. Arthur looked bored. He checked his Rolex. He had a merger to close in 2 days. This was just a nuisance. Benedict started slowly. He asked about the marriage, the separation date, the living arrangements. Arthur answered breezily, charmingly. Mr. Taylor, Benedict said, adjusting his reading glasses. Let's talk about finances. Have you disclosed all assets, liabilities, and income sources as required by law? Absolutely, Arthur said, spreading his hands. My life is an open book. And Taylor Dynamics? What is your current valuation of the company? It's volatile, Arthur lied smoothly. The market is down. We're struggling with supply chain issues. If I had to sell today, maybe 50 million. On a good day. Victoria stifled a laugh. The Omnicorp offer was on the table for 400 million. I see. Benedict wrote something down. And are there any pending deals? Mergers? Acquisitions that might affect this valuation? This was the trap. If he told the truth, the value of the company skyrockets, and her half gets bigger. If he lies, he commits perjury. Arthur didn't hesitate. He looked right into the camera lens. No. There are rumors, of course. Always rumors. But nothing concrete. No offers on the table. Under the table, Victoria kicked Benedict's foot. He lied. Benedict kept his face stony. Nothing concrete. Okay. And do you hold any interest in any other entities? Shell companies? Offshore accounts? No, Arthur said, looking annoyed. Everything is in the Taylor Family Trust or my personal accounts. What about a company called Blue Horizon LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands? Benedict asked casually. Arthur blinked. Just once, a micro-expression of panic. Silas shifted in his seat. I believe that's a defunct entity, Arthur stammered. Something we set up years ago for a real estate deal that fell through. It has no assets. No assets, Benedict repeated. Okay, we'll move on. They didn't produce the bank statements Tobias had found. They didn't show the transfer of the $12 million. They moved on. Arthur relaxed. He thought he had gotten away with it. He thought Benedict was just fishing and had come up empty. The deposition lasted 6 hours. By the end, Arthur was joking with the stenographer. As they were packing up, Arthur leaned across the table. Victoria, really, this is exhausting. Just sign the settlement. Take the beach house. You look tired. This stress isn't good for your wrinkles. I'm fine, Arthur, she said, snapping her briefcase shut. I'm just waiting for the truth to come out. The truth is what I say it is, he whispered, low enough so the lawyers wouldn't hear. I won, Victoria. The company is mine. The money is mine. Jessica is mine. You're just a footnote in my biography. Victoria walked out of that room with her head high, but her hands were trembling. He perjured himself 7 times, Benedict said in the elevator. Does it matter? She asked. If the judge believes him? Oh, it matters, Benedict grinned, because now we have him under oath denying the existence of the merger. When the merger is announced next week, we prove fraud. But that's just the appetizer. What's the main course? The Articles of Incorporation, Benedict said. I had my team dig into the archives of the Delaware Secretary of State. The digital records were messy, just like you said. But we found the physical microfiche from 1998. And? Benedict turned to her, his eyes twinkling. Arthur Taylor is listed as the CEO, but he is not listed as the founder. Her heart skipped a beat. Who is? The founder shares, Class A voting stock, which holds 51% controlling interest in the event of a sale or dissolution, were issued to a silent partner. My father, she breathed. No, Benedict said. Not your father. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Who? Benedict handed her a photocopy of a document that was 28 years old. The signature at the bottom was faded, written in blue ink. Founder and majority shareholder, Victoria Taylor. She stared at the paper. She remembered that day. They were in the garage. Her father had come over with the lawyer. Arthur was busy fixing the prototype. Her father had put the papers in front of her. Arthur is the engine, Vicky, her father had said. But you're the steering wheel. He doesn't need to know you have the keys. Let him think he's driving. But if he ever tries to crash the car, you need to be able to pull the brake. She had signed it. She was 22. She had forgotten. Arthur had never known. He thought he owned 100% of the company because her father let him play CEO. But legally, she owned 51%. He's trying to sell my company, she whispered. Exactly, Benedict said. And since he denied the merger under oath and denied your involvement, he's not just committing fraud against you, he's committing securities fraud against Omnicorp. He's selling them something he doesn't have the right to sell. So what do? We wait, Benedict said. The merger signing ceremony is in 3 days. We let him sign. We let him pop the champagne, and then we serve him with an injunction that freezes the entire deal, exposes his perjury, and reveals that he just sold a company he doesn't own. Victoria smiled. For the first time in months, it wasn't a mask, it was real. I want to be there, she said. Oh, you will be, Benedict promised. We're going to crash the party. The signing ceremony for the acquisition of Taylor Dynamics by Omnicorp was held in the grand ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental, overlooking Central Park. It was an event that screamed excessive wealth. The tables were draped in silver silk, and the centerpieces were towering arrangements of white orchids imported from Singapore. The room was packed with the titans of industry. There were hedge fund managers from Greenwich, tech moguls from Silicon Valley, and the entire board of directors for Omnicorp. Victoria arrived 20 minutes late. She wasn't wearing the blue dress Arthur liked. She wasn't wearing the red dress of a scorned woman. She wore a tailored white suit, sharp and architectural, looking less like a wife and more like a CEO. Benedict walked beside her, carrying a thick leather portfolio. Behind them walked 2 uniformed NYPD officers, off-duty, but hired for private security, and Tobias Finch, looking uncomfortable in a rented tuxedo, but clutching his tablet like a weapon. They didn't sneak in. They walked through the main double doors, just as Richard Halloway, the CEO of Omnicorp, was taking the podium. Today marks a new era, Halloway was saying, his voice booming over the sound system. With the acquisition of Taylor Dynamics, we are combining innovation with scale. And it is all thanks to the vision of one man, Arthur Taylor. Applause rippled through the room. Arthur stood up, beaming. He looked like a king. Jessica was seated next to him, wearing a dress that cost more than Victoria's first car, clapping enthusiastically, playing the role of the supportive partner, perfectly. They hadn't seen her yet. "And now," Holloway announced, "the signing of the definitive agreement." Arthur walked up to the long table on the stage. Holloway joined him. A team of lawyers placed the heavy binders in front of them. Arthur picked up a gold fountain pen, a gift Victoria had given him for their 10th anniversary. He uncapped it. He lowered the pen to the paper. "Stop!" Her voice wasn't a scream. It was a projection, trained from years of hosting galas in rooms exactly like this. It cut through the applause like a knife. The room froze. 300 heads turned. Arthur's pen hovered millimeters from the page. He looked up, squinting against the stage lights. When he saw her, the blood drained from his face so fast, he looked like a corpse. "Victoria?" he stammered into the microphone, which was still live. "What are you doing here?" She walked down the center aisle, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. The sound echoed in the silent room. "I'm here to save Mr. Holloway a great deal of embarrassment," she said, her voice steady. Jessica stood up, her face flushed with anger. "Security! Get her out of here! She's his mentally unstable ex-wife!" 2 security guards stepped forward, but the NYPD officers behind Victoria stepped up, badges visible. The guards backed down. She reached the stage. She didn't look at Arthur. She looked directly at Richard Holloway. "Mr. Holloway," she said, "I am Victoria Taylor, and I believe you are about to purchase a company from a man who does not have the authority to sell it." Holloway, a man known for his ruthlessness, looked confused. "Mrs. Taylor, this is a finalized deal. Arthur is the sole proprietor." "Is he?" she asked. She signaled to Benedict. Benedict stepped up and slapped a certified copy of the 1998 Articles of Incorporation onto the table, right on top of the merger contract. "If you will look at Exhibit A," Benedict boomed, addressing the room as if it were a jury, "you will see that the Class A founder shares, which carry 51% voting rights and veto power over any sale or dissolution of assets, are registered to Victoria Taylor." Arthur laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "This is ridiculous. That was just a formality, a joke my father-in-law played. I've run this company for 20 years. I built it." "You managed it, Arthur," Victoria corrected him, stepping onto the stage. "You were the CEO, an employee, but you never owned the controlling stake. My father made sure of that. He knew you'd try something like this eventually." She turned to Holloway. "Furthermore, Mr. Holloway, my husband is currently under investigation for perjury and embezzlement. He has funneled $12 million of company assets I own 51% of, into an offshore shell company called Blue Horizon to hide them from divorce proceedings. If you sign that paper, you are purchasing stolen goods and becoming an accessory to fraud." The room erupted. Flashbulbs went off like a strobe light storm. Reporters were shouting questions. Holloway looked at the document Benedict had provided. He looked at Arthur, who was sweating profusely. Then he looked at Jessica, who was trying to edge away from the table. Holloway closed the binder. "Arthur," Holloway said, his voice ice cold, "is this true? Do you not hold the majority shares?" "Richard, listen to me," Arthur pleaded, grabbing Holloway's sleeve. "She's crazy. She's never been involved. This is a technicality. I can fix it." "A technicality?" Holloway pulled his arm away. "You represented yourself as the sole owner. That's warranty fraud. That's securities fraud." Holloway turned to his team. "Pack it up. The deal is dead." "No!" Arthur screamed. "Richard, wait! Don't listen to her!" But it was over. The Omnicorp executives were already closing their briefcases. The stock price of Taylor Dynamics was likely crashing in real time as the news hit the wires. Victoria stood center stage, watching Arthur unravel. He turned to her, his eyes wild with hate. He raised a hand as if to strike her. The two NYPD officers were on the stage in a second. One of them, a burly sergeant named Miller, grabbed Arthur's wrist. "I wouldn't do that, Mr. Taylor," Miller said. "We have a warrant for the seizure of your electronic devices regarding the embezzlement investigation. And Miss Banks, we need your phone too." Jessica shrieked. "My phone? I didn't do anything." "You're listed as the co-signatory on the Blue Horizon account, Miss Banks," Tobias Finch said from the floor, holding up a printout. "We tracked the IP address of the transfers. They came from your condo." Jessica looked at Arthur. "You said my name wouldn't be on it. You said I was just a beneficiary." Arthur roared. "Shut up, Jessica." Victoria leaned into the microphone one last time. "Arthur," she said softly, intimate yet amplified for the world to hear. "You wanted a divorce? You've got one. I'll see you in court. And this time, bring a better lawyer." The divorce trial of Taylor vs. Taylor became the tabloid event of the season. They called it the War of the Roses for the digital age. Because of the fraud allegations and the complexity of the corporate ownership, the case was moved to the Supreme Court of New York, presided over by Judge Evelyn Hargrave. Judge Hargrave was a legend. She was 60 years old, sharp as a tack, and had zero tolerance for nonsense. She had famously presided over the dismantling of the Ricci crime family. A divorce was a walk in the park for her. The courtroom was packed every day. Victoria sat on the plaintiff's side, calm and collected. Arthur sat on the defense side, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a month. His hair was thinning, his suit hung loose on his frame, and Silas Moore looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Jessica was there too, not as a party to the case, but as a witness. Arthur had been foolish enough to call her to testify to his wife's character. The strategy was simple. Arthur was trying to prove that even if Victoria owned the shares, she had abandoned the company and the marriage, thereby forfeiting her rights under the concept of lux, legal negligence. He wanted to prove she was an unfit partner who contributed nothing. Jessica took the stand on the third day. She looked demure. She wore a high-necked grey dress and had dyed her hair a darker, more serious shade of blonde. She played the victim. She cried on cue when Silas asked her about the harassment she had endured from the press. Mrs. Taylor was distant, Jessica told the court, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Arthur was so lonely. He worked 18-hour days to build that company. He did everything. Victoria just spent the money. She never came to the office. She didn't even know the names of the board members. "So, in your opinion," Silas asked, "Mrs. Taylor was a wife in name only?" "Yes," Jessica said firmly. "She was a ghost. She didn't care about Arthur or the company. She only cared about her status." Then she looked at Victoria. It was a fleeting moment. The court reporter was typing. The audience was shifting. Jessica locked eyes with Victoria and smiled. It was that same smirk from the restaurant, a look that said, "I'm winning. I have him. You're old, and I'm the future." She thought she was untouchable. Benedict Cole stood up for cross-examination. He moved slowly, leaning on the podium. "Miss Banks," Benedict began, "you testified that Mr. Taylor was lonely, that he worked 18-hour days." "Yes," she said. "And you were with him during those days?" "I was his executive assistant before we became involved. Yes." "And you handled his schedule, his correspondence?" "Yes." "Did you also handle his banking?" Benedict asked. Silas Moore jumped up. "Objection. Relevance." "Goes to credibility, Your Honor," Benedict said. Judge Hargrave peered over her glasses. "Overruled. Answer the question." "I sometimes helped him with transfers," Jessica said, her voice wavering slightly. Did you help him with the transfers to Blue Horizon LLC? I don't know what that is, Jessica lied. Benedict pulled a piece of paper. I have here an email from your work account, sent to a banker in the Caymans, dated December 12th. Subject line, funds for the nest egg. The body reads, Arthur wants to move another $2 million before the bitch finds out. Excuse my language, Your Honor. I am quoting. The courtroom gasped. Jessica's face went pale. I was just following orders, she stammered. So you did know about the account? Benedict pressed. Yes, but Arthur told me to do it. He said it was his money. Miss Banks, Benedict said, lowering his voice. Let's go back to the company. You said Victoria didn't know the names of the board members. You said she was checked out. She was. If she was so checked out, Benedict said, walking toward the witness stand. Why did you feel the need to shred the physical archives in the basement of Taylor Dynamics on the night of January 3rd? Arthur stood up. Objection. There's no proof of that. Sit down, Mr. Taylor, Judge Hargrave barked. Benedict turned to the judge. We have security footage, Your Honor, recovered by a forensic team. It shows Miss Banks and Mr. Taylor entering the archives at 2 a.m. and feeding documents into an industrial shredder. Specifically, boxes labeled 1998 Incorporation. He turned back to Jessica. You tried to destroy the evidence of Mrs. Taylor's ownership, didn't you? You didn't smile then, did you, Miss Banks? Jessica looked at Arthur. Arthur was burying his face in his hands. He told me to, Jessica screamed, pointing at Arthur. He told me that if we got rid of the paper copies, the digital records were messy enough to fight it. He said Victoria was too stupid to have copies. It was his idea. The silence that followed was absolute. Jessica had just confessed a conspiracy to commit fraud and spoliation of evidence, and she had implicated Arthur in open court. Judge Hargrave stared at Jessica. Then she looked at Arthur. Mr. Taylor, the judge said, her voice terrifyingly calm, I have a question for you, and I suggest you think very carefully before you answer. Arthur stood up, trembling. Who owns Taylor Dynamics? The judge asked. Arthur looked at Silas. Silas shook his head, closing his folder. He was done. Arthur looked at Victoria. She wasn't smiling. She was just watching. Victoria, Arthur whispered. Victoria owns it. And the money in the Cayman Islands? The judge asked. It was company funds, diverted without authorization, Arthur admitted, his voice cracking. Judge Hargrave banged her gavel. It sounded like a gunshot. This court finds Mr. Taylor in contempt. I am freezing all assets immediately. I am also referring both Mr. Taylor and Miss Banks to the District Attorney's Office for potential criminal prosecution regarding fraud and embezzlement. As for the divorce petition, I am granting a summary judgment in favor of the plaintiff, Victoria Taylor. She looked down at Victoria. Mrs. Taylor, the company is yours, the assets are yours, and frankly, you're well rid of him. Jessica was sobbing loudly as the bailiff approached her to escort her out, not to the hallway, but to a holding room. The Blue Horizon fraud was a federal crime. Arthur slumped into his chair. He didn't look at Jessica. He didn't look at Victoria. He looked at the table, realizing that the empire he thought he built was made of sand, and the tide had just come in. Victoria stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked out of the courtroom. The paparazzi were waiting, but for the first time she didn't care about the cameras. She had a company to run. The transition of power at Taylor Dynamics was not a gentle handover. It was an exorcism. The Monday following the verdict, Victoria walked into the lobby of the Taylor Tower. She wasn't entering as a visitor or a spouse. She scanned her new badge, black, platinum-embossed CEO. The beep was the sweetest sound she had heard in years. The atmosphere in the building was frantic. Junior analysts were whispering in corners. Executives were frantically scrubbing their hard drives, terrified they might be implicated in Arthur's Blue Horizon scheme. She took the private elevator to the 45th floor. Arthur's office was exactly as he had left it the day he was arrested, a shrine to his own ego. There was a portrait of him behind the desk, oil on canvas, looking stoic. "Get rid of it," she said to the movers she had hired. "Burn it, sell it, I don't care. Just get it off my wall." Tobias Finch walked in, looking strangely comfortable in a suit now that he was her chief financial officer. "Silas Moore is in conference room B," Tobias said, checking his tablet. "He says he needs to discuss the transition of legal counsel." "He doesn't have a transition," Victoria said, smoothing the lapel of her jacket. "He has an eviction." She walked into conference room B. Silas was there, sweating through his expensive Italian shirt. He tried to stand, to offer a hand, to smile that oily smile that had charmed juries for decades. "Victoria," he started, "I just want to say, the way you handled the courtroom, masterful. Truly, I think we can find a way to work together to minimize the fallout for the company." Victoria didn't sit down. She tossed a file folder onto the mahogany table. It slid across and hit his chest. "That is a formal complaint filed with the New York State Bar Association, Silas," she said. "It details your subornation of perjury, your knowledge of the offshore accounts, and your collusion to defraud a shareholder." "Me." Silas went pale. "Victoria, be reasonable. I was acting on my client's instructions. Attorney-client privilege protects—" "Arthur waived privilege this morning," she interrupted, enjoying the look of absolute horror that washed over his face. "He's trying to cut a deal for a lighter sentence. He gave you up, Silas. Security is waiting to escort you out. If you're not gone in 5 minutes, the police will be the ones escorting you." Silas didn't argue. He grabbed his briefcase and ran. The viper had lost his fangs, but the true victory wasn't Silas. It was the man sitting in the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville 3 months later. The visiting room was sterile, smelling of bleach and despair. Arthur sat behind the plexiglass. He had aged 10 years in 90 days. The stress of the trial and the reality of prison had dissolved the handsome, confident CEO facade. He looked small. He picked up the phone receiver. Victoria did the same. "You came," he said, his voice raspy. "I had to bring the final stock transfer papers," she said, sliding the documents through the slot. "The restitution order. You're signing over your remaining liquid assets to cover the legal fees and the Omnicorp penalty." He signed without reading. He didn't care about money anymore. He cared about his narrative. "I built that company, Victoria," he whispered, his eyes pleading for validation. "The late nights, the deals. You were at home. You were hosting parties. You don't know what it took." Victoria leaned in closer to the glass. "You were the face, Arthur. You shook the hands. But who do you think secured the loans in 2008 when the banks were closing? Who do you think negotiated the supplier contracts in China while you were golfing in Augusta? Who do you think proofread every single annual report because you couldn't be bothered with the details?" He stared at her. "I didn't just host parties, Arthur," she said coldly. "I was networking. I was building safety nets. I was the architect. You were just living in the house I built. And the moment you tried to lock me out of it, you realized you didn't have the keys." He looked down, defeated. "And Jessica?" "Jessica," Victoria let out a short, dry laugh. "She turned on you the moment the handcuffs clicked. She claimed you coerced her. She got probation." "Where is she?" "Tobias found her," she said. "She's back in Ohio. She's working at a Sephora in a mall. She's trying to be an influencer on TikTok, telling her truth about being manipulated by a powerful CEO. But the comment section, they're eating her alive. She's not a victim, Arthur. She's a punchline. Victoria stood up. What will you do now? He asked. Sell to Omnicorp. No, she said. I called Richard Halloway. I told him the price has gone up. We're not selling. We're acquiring. I'm buying one of their subsidiaries. We're expanding. Arthur's jaw dropped. You're buying them? I told you. She smiled, and it was the first time she felt truly light in years. I'm the CEO. Goodbye, Arthur. Victoria walked out of the prison into the grey afternoon. The air tasted sweet. Tobias was waiting by the Bentley. He opened the door for her. Where to, Miss Taylor? The airport, Tobias, she said, settling into the leather seat. We have a meeting in London tomorrow. And then, I think I'll take a vacation. Somewhere warm. Somewhere with no cell service. As the car pulled away, she looked back at the prison walls one last time. She didn't feel pity. She didn't feel anger. She felt balance. The scales had been corrected. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But they're wrong. Revenge isn't a dish. It's a business transaction. And business was booming. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the downfall of Arthur Taylor. He lost his wife, his freedom, and his empire, all because he underestimated the woman standing quietly in his shadow. Victoria didn't just win, she rewrote the game. It's a powerful lesson. Never mistake silence for ignorance, and never, ever forget who actually owns the company. If you loved this story of corporate takedowns and supreme justice, please smash that like button. It really supports the channel and helps me create more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're the first to know when the next drama drops. I have a question for you all. Do you think Jessica deserved a harsher punishment, or was living a normal life in Ohio punishment enough for someone so vain? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be reading and pinning the best ones. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.